He barked at a helicopter and saved 17 lives. No alarms, no blinking red lights, no malfunction reports. Just a German shepherd named Blitz, barking at a silent chopper. At first, everyone thought it was nerves. Maybe the dog wasn't used to the noise. Maybe he was just tired. But Elena, his handler, froze. Because Blitz never barked without a reason. Hours later, investigators confirmed the aircraft had a near-invisible structural fault. Had it taken off, it would have disintegrated mid-air with high-ranking officials aboard. This isn't a story about machines, it's about instinct. About the kind of loyalty that goes beyond orders or sensors. And about a dog who changed the course of an entire military operation without ever saying a word. If you think animals just follow training, think again. Blitz didn't follow. He led. And this is the moment the world began to listen. The morning fog hung over Redwood North Air Base like a heavy curtain, thick and still, muffling the world into grayscale silence. The tarmac glistened with dew, reflecting the pale orange of distant hangar lights. In that half-light between night and dawn, everything felt suspended, timeless, hushed, waiting. Through that mist, the low hum of an SUV cut through the silence. Its headlights barely pierced the fog, hazing into ghostly beams. Officer Elena Price pulled the vehicle into a reserved K-9 unit bay and shifted into park, her gloved hands lingering on the steering wheel. The dashboard clock glowed faintly. 05:32. She exhaled, slow and steady, trying to center herself. In the back compartment, a rustle and low whuff of breath reminded her she wasn't alone. Blitz. She reached back and unlatched the steel gate. "Morning, partner," she murmured. With a fluid grace honed by training and instinct, Blitz, a sleek 4-year-old German shepherd with eyes like tempered obsidian, stepped onto the ground. The moment his paws hit the tarmac, his posture changed. His ears flicked forward, body still, nose lifted to the air. Elena paused. "What is it?" she whispered, though she already knew. The air was different. Damp, electrically charged, and Blitz, he always felt it first. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the distant scent of jet fuel, ozone, and something earthier, heavier a storm. She knelt beside him, adjusting the tactical vest strapped snug across his ribs. His tag read Police K-9, Unit 7R. He stood still, his breathing steady, but his eyes scanned the horizon as if reading a threat that hadn't yet announced itself. "You're early," she said quietly, not expecting a response. "But I know you feel it, don't you?" Elena stood, her boots crunching softly over gravel as they moved across the lot. Around them, the base slowly stirred to life. Flight crews in neon vests pushed carts. Voices murmured over radios, but Blitz remained attuned to everything, still, sharp, unreadable. It had taken months to gain his trust. Blitz hadn't started his life as a police dog. He was rescued from an illegal kennel operation 3 years ago, malnourished and caged, but something in his stare, calm, intelligent, undaunted, had caught her attention during a K-9 unit rehabilitation initiative. He was a survivor, and when he worked, he didn't just follow commands, he listened to the world. As they crossed toward the hangar, the fog seemed to thin, just slightly. The massive structure loomed ahead like a dark mouth carved into the mist, floodlights shimmering off the painted lettering, Redwood North, Unit 5 Ops. A familiar voice called out, "Price, your mud always this serious at sunrise?" Elena looked up to see Lieutenant Grant Howell, arms folded, leaning against the hangar doorway. His crisp uniform and clean-shaven jawline looked more military than municipal, and his expression, a mixture of skepticism and challenge, never quite softened. "Depends," Elena replied evenly. "On what he smells." Howell huffed a laugh. "Well, let's hope it's not attitude. Briefing in 15. Your pilot's already inspecting the bird." She nodded. Blitz moved beside her without command, stepping in perfect rhythm as they entered the building. The interior of the hangar glowed in strips of cold white overhead lights, bouncing off the sleek contours of the Bell 429 helicopter stationed at the center. It looked pristine. Gleaming blue and black body, rotor blades at rest, doors sealed. Beneath it, aviation techs knelt beside gear crates and diagnostic tablets. The faint scent of machine oil hung in the air, acrid, metallic, oddly comforting. Blitz paused at the edge of the painted line on the floor that marked the perimeter. He sat, waiting, watching. Elena's boots echoed as she crossed to the crew table, removing her gloves and pulling out a tablet of her own. She checked the mission roster again. Judge Evelyn Ward, transport time 0730, escort path over State Route 18, aerial overwatch until convoy reaches Civic Plaza. Simple on paper, but nothing about this felt simple. Blitz let out a soft exhale. Elena glanced down. "You feel it too, huh?" she whispered, brushing her hand lightly over his head. His ears twitched once. Suddenly, one of the junior techs approached, a lanky man with nervous eyes and a data pad clutched tightly. "Ma'am, your K9 needs to be logged for airframe compatibility," he said, already pulling up a form. "Noise calibration, weight distribution, harness certification." Elena passed him the documents without hesitation. "All current," she replied. "He's flown Bell class more times than most of your pilots." The tech nodded awkwardly. "Yes, ma'am. Sorry." She watched him leave, then turned to Blitz. "They don't get it, but you do." At that moment, a deep rumble echoed from outside. Thunder, distant but heavy. The storm wasn't waiting for permission. From above the control mezzanine, Howell called out again. "Briefing room's open. Bring the wolf." Blitz stood, responding to Elena's low whistle. As they made their way to the room at the far end of the hangar, a security monitor flickered in the corner of Elena's vision. A grainy camera view interior hangar, time-stamped 2 nights ago, 02:17 a.m., showed a shadowed figure walking toward the helicopter. She slowed. No one else noticed. "Late night check," muttered one tech offhandedly. "Probably maintenance." But something about how that figure moved, lingered. Blitz glanced at the monitor, then back at the helicopter, nose twitching slightly. Elena didn't say a word, but in her chest a small weight began to settle. They continued toward the meeting. Unbeknownst to everyone in that hangar, a countdown had already begun. The door to the operations room closed with a muted click, shutting out the murmur of the hangar. Inside, a large digital map glowed across the far wall, casting a pale blue hue over the briefing table and the dozen faces gathered around it. The air smelled faintly of coffee, metal, and the sharp tang of rain seeping through the building's old vents. Officer Elena Price took her seat near the far end of the table, Blitz settling quietly at her feet. His ears twitched, but he made no sound. He rarely did unless something was wrong. Across from her stood Lieutenant Grant Howell, arms folded, eyes scanning the room with the unblinking precision of a man who didn't tolerate deviations. His tone was already clipped when he began. 0730 is wheels up. Redwood Air Unit will provide aerial overwatch for the convoy transporting Judge Evelyn Ward to the summit on public integrity. A satellite view of the city flickered into focus on the screen, zooming in on the route, a winding stretch from the downtown courthouse to the Capitol building. Multiple protest groups are already mobilizing near Civic Plaza. Most are peaceful, but intelligence suggests an extremist cell may attempt to disrupt the event. Elena exchanged a glance with Captain Miles Vance, seated 2 chairs over. The pilot gave her a slight nod, nothing more than professional acknowledgement, but something in his eyes told her he was reading the room the same way she was. There was tension here, not just the usual pre-op pressure. Something unspoken, tight, heavy. Lieutenant Howell continued, "Our bird will take the high route over Route 18, monitoring from above with eyes on motorcade progress and known protest choke points." Beside the map, a set of floor plans flickered into view. The layout of Civic Plaza, road closures, building elevations. Technicians Wilson and Reese, tasked with surveillance and thermal monitoring, began logging their positions. But Elena wasn't looking at the map anymore. She was watching Blitz. Her partner lay on the ground but hadn't relaxed. His head rested between his paws, but his nostrils flared every few seconds. His ears stayed angled not backward in rest, but forward, alert, focused. A soft shift of muscle along his back confirmed it. He was paying attention, not to voices, to something else. She touched his shoulder briefly under the table. He didn't react. Something about the air in the room, or about the people. "Command has approved limited rappelling gear in case an emergency rooftop evac is needed," Howell said, flipping to a new schematic. "But this is standard protocol. No heroics." Vance gave a quiet laugh. "Standard protocol. I like the sound of that. Been a while." Howell didn't smile. "Your humor's noted, Captain." The chuckle faded. Vance leaned forward, elbows on the table. "What's the real threat level, sir? The usual protest noise or something more coordinated?" A pause. Elena noticed it. Everyone did. Howell tapped a folder without opening it. "We've had chatter. Same names resurfacing. A few flagged transfers of encrypted comms. No confirmed explosives, no manifestos, but enough to justify a K-9 airborne unit and enhanced surveillance." Her fingers brushed Blitz's vest again, grounding herself in the familiar routine. But deep down, the unease was spreading. "Why Evelyn Ward?" Reese asked. "She's just a judge." Howell's expression darkened. "She's the judge. The summit will unveil her recommendation to unseal classified corruption cases tied to multiple state contracts, including aviation contracts." Elena sat a little straighter. That explained the presence of their unit and the hush around the mission. "She's pissed off some powerful people," Howell added. "That makes her a target of interest." Another flicker on the monitor security footage, cycling through last night's perimeter rounds. Elena leaned in slightly. Nothing out of place. But Blitz stirred. Just a shift in weight. A change in breathing. Not fear, not anxiety, but attention. Howell's voice dropped into the background as Elena studied her partner. He hadn't moved this much during a briefing since their very first mission together, when he'd detected a booby-trapped minivan outside a federal courthouse. Back then, nobody had believed a rehab dog could outperform a certified explosive detection unit. Until Blitz proved them wrong. "Sergeant Price?" Howell's voice cut through. She blinked. "Status of your K-9 unit?" She nodded. "Fully operational. Rappelling harness cleared. Hearing protection calibrated. Blitz is flight tested and airframe adapted." "You sure he's calm enough for turbulence?" "He's calmer than half the flight crew, sir." A few stifled laughs followed. easing the tension. Howell glanced down at Blitz. The dog's eyes met his, and didn't blink. "Let's keep it that way," Howell muttered, before turning back to the map. Elena felt a pulse of something hard to name ripple beneath her skin. Blitz didn't break eye contact with the screen. His nose lifted just slightly, as if the static on the monitor carried scent. Something wasn't right, but there was no proof. Not yet. Howell dismissed the meeting. "Comms check at 0700. Final inspection at 0715. Anyone not ready by then doesn't fly." Chairs scraped back. The team dispersed, murmuring about gear, radio frequencies, wind speed forecasts. But Elena remained seated for a beat longer. Her eyes flicked to the vent in the ceiling, to the door Blitz kept glancing toward. Still air, no movement. But something's off. She rose slowly and tugged gently on Blitz's vest. He stood, silently. The two moved toward the exit as Howell called out, "Price?" She paused. "You're too cautious," he said. "That'll bite you one day." She offered a small, unamused smile. "Or save us both." Then she walked out with Blitz flanking her, perfectly in sync. Behind them, the overhead lights flickered once, brief, almost imperceptible. But Blitz noticed. He always did. Outside the briefing room, the fog had begun to thin, but the light hadn't fully returned. The hangar lights cast long shadows across the tarmac, blending with the low rumble of auxiliary generators and distant aircraft turbines beginning to stir awake. Elena walked in silence beside Blitz, the two moving like parts of one thought-measured, precise alert. The operations tempo was picking up now. Ground crews were rolling carts stacked with comms gear toward the waiting Bell 429. The bird's curved body glinted dully beneath the fluorescent glow, quiet for now, but already humming faintly with pre-flight diagnostics. They stopped at their gear crate near the base of the ramp. Elena crouched down, opening the latches in practiced motion, revealing Blitz's loadout: tactical repelling harness, high-frequency hearing protection, paw guards, and an extra canister of chemical neutralizer secured in a Velcro pouch. She held the harness up for inspection, running her fingers slowly along each strap, checking for fraying, tension, elasticity. Everything had to be perfect. Blitz didn't complain, didn't fidget. He stood still as stone, eyes following her hands, as if knowing the ritual mattered. "You remember the wind gusts over Route 16 last March?" she said softly, voice meant for no one but him. "You didn't blink once. Meanwhile, I was holding my lunch down the whole flight." Blitz let out a slow breath, his chest rising and falling like a measured wave. Elena smiled faintly and clipped the vest into place. The word police was stitched in reflective silver across both sides. She checked the repelling buckles twice, then again. She always did. "You're the only one I trust not to drop me from 600 feet, she added. "Don't let that go to your head." She slipped on his hearing protection next, a soft, fitted set that cupped around his ears just enough to mute the rotor noise but not blunt his senses. Blitz tolerated it, just like everything else, because that was the deal they had. She would protect his trust, and he would never let her walk into danger blind. There was a quiet between them then, not empty, but full, of understanding, of miles already shared and danger already outlived. Suddenly, a voice broke through the ambient hum. "You know we've swept that chopper 3 times already, right?" Elena turned to see Officer Cole, one of the ground crew supervisors, nodding toward the helicopter with a smirk. 3 sweeps. 2 by humans, 1 by machine. Nothing gets past us. "I'm counting on that," Elena replied evenly, but her eyes didn't leave Blitz. Cole leaned on the crate. glancing at the dog. He acting strange? I mean, stranger than usual? Blitz had shifted his weight slightly, just slightly. Nose up, muscles taut but not rigid, sensing something, but not yet ready to act on it. "No," Elena said. "Not strange, just focused." Cole shrugged. "Can't fault that." Then he added with a little more seriousness, "Though between us, this mission's got people twitchier than usual." Elena nodded. She felt it too. An edge running beneath the usual procedural calm, like a tension cable stretched just past its rating. She closed the gear case and stood. Across the hangar, a security feed monitor flickered in the shadows of the mezzanine. It wasn't in her direct line of sight, but she caught the movement in the corner of her vision. A tech rotated through archived camera footage as part of routine system checks. On one of the screens, the hangar's interior, time-stamped 02:17 a.m. 2 nights ago. A figure, dark, lean, with a tool bag slung low, moved into the frame. No name badge, no ID visible, just there. The figure knelt near the helicopter's tail boom for 23 seconds, adjusted something, then exited the frame without looking back. The tech didn't react. Probably didn't notice anything unusual. Probably hadn't zoomed in. But Elena saw it. Just a flicker, a presence that didn't belong. Her hand drifted to Blitz's shoulder again. He was staring in the same direction at the screen, still not moving, but breathing differently. That was the thing about Blitz. He didn't bark at danger. He just noticed it before it existed. Elena filed the timestamp in her memory, said nothing. Captain Vance approached from the other side of the hangar, helmet in hand, looking tired but focused. "Fuel levels check out. Nav sync is green," he said, pausing by the loading ramp. "If the weather holds, it'll be a smooth flight." Elena gave him a look. "When has it ever held?" Vance grinned. "A man can dream." He knelt to give Blitz a quick scratch behind the ear. "Morning, hero. You ready for some altitude?" Blitz allowed it, then turned his gaze back toward the helicopter, eyes still locked on the tail section. Vance raised an eyebrow. "He's really dialed in today." "Yeah," Elena said, tightening one of the repelling straps. "And he hasn't looked away once." Vance straightened. "We good?" Elena nodded, but slowly. "We're ready," she said. "But something about this one feels off." Vance didn't laugh this time, just nodded quietly, then moved toward the co-pilot station where checklists awaited. Blitz remained seated beside her, rigid, unblinking, sensing more than anyone in the hangar was willing to acknowledge. Elena followed his stare back to the tail of the helicopter. The bird looked pristine, cleared, swept, certified. But appearances didn't matter to Blitz. He didn't look at checklists or thermal readings. He didn't care about clearance codes or who signed off on what. He just knew when something wasn't right. And right now, he hadn't blinked in nearly 2 minutes. The rhythmic thud of boots and clatter of gear echoed across the tarmac like distant war drums as the flight team moved into final prep mode. The Bell 429 helicopter now sat like a coiled predator beneath the fading fog, tail blades still, body gleaming. There was energy in the air, restless, pulsing, hard to name. Elena Price stood with her back to the hangar, tightening her gloves as she scanned the loading sequence. Crates of thermal optics, emergency packs, and surveillance equipment were being hauled aboard by Officers Wilson and Reese. Their movements were sharp, efficient routine honed by repetition, but today even the routine felt brittle. She adjusted the carabiners on her belt, then turned toward Blitz. "All right, partner," she said under her breath. "Let's go make friends with gravity." Blitz looked up at her, unreadable as always but ready. They moved together across the ramp. Wind skimmed low across the tarmac, tugging gently at Blitz's ears, swirling dust around his paws. The rotor above them remained silent, blades locked in place like a suspended guillotine, waiting only for ignition. As they neared the base of the boarding ramp, Elena felt Blitz's gait shift slightly. It was subtle, barely more than a hesitation in stride, but after years with him she didn't miss it. Her pace slowed. "Come on, boy," she coaxed, voice casual. Up we go. Blitz took 2 steps forward, then froze. His entire body went rigid. Ears pinned forward, eyes locked on the helicopter's tail section. Every hair along his spine stood like static against his vest. He didn't growl, didn't flinch, just stopped. And in that stillness, Elena knew. This wasn't uncertainty. This was the alert, the one she'd seen only in live exercises or worst-case field deployments, the one they'd drilled over and over until it became instinct. This posture wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was warning. She stopped beside him, hand tightening on his lead. "Blitz?" she asked softly. No response. His nose lifted faintly, drawing in the air. His tail lowered, muscles tensed beneath the harness, still locked on the tail boom of the helicopter. "Let's go," she said again, giving the lead a slight tug. That's when he stepped backward. Not a stumble, a deliberate motion, just 1 foot behind the other, shifting his weight away from the aircraft. Her breath caught in her throat. That was the cue. The one he'd been trained to use when detecting the presence of chemical residue explosives, solvents, or even micro-fractured compounds he couldn't fully identify but still registered as wrong. She knelt beside him, scanning his posture. No paw injury, no twisted strap. His breathing was steady, but his focus never broke. A few feet away, Officer Reese noticed. "Hey, everything all right?" Elena didn't answer at first. Blitz's ears twitched. His shoulders remained locked, one paw half lifted, waiting, watching. "I think he's hesitating," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dog doesn't like helicopters?" Reese joked. Blitz had flown in 47 missions. Night, day, in wind, in desert, once under heavy gunfire during a joint task op in eastern Oregon. He didn't hesitate. "Something's got his attention," she murmured, half to herself. Behind them, the rotor hissed with its first spin, slow at first, a lazy turn of massive blades. The sound stirred everything in the space, but Blitz didn't react to the noise. His focus never moved from the tail. Elena stood slowly. Lieutenant Howell was striding across the hangar floor now, his jacket flapping slightly in the breeze. "Price? Problem?" "Not yet, sir," she said, eyes still on Blitz. "But he's not boarding." Howell looked unimpressed. "Is he injured?" "No." "Then we don't have time for nerves. The judge is wheels up in 40 minutes. She didn't flinch. "It's not nerves." Howell frowned. "Your dog's freezing up before flight. That's nerves." Elena turned to him, calm but firm. "He's giving a passive alert." Now Howell paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle. "That serious?" "Blitz doesn't false positive," she said. A beat. Then Captain Vance's voice called from the cockpit hatch. "What's going on?" "Dog's got cold feet," Howell called back. Elena didn't take her eyes off Blitz. "He's not scared." She loosened the lead, letting it drop away from his harness. "Blitz," she whispered. "Show me." The moment the tension released from the tether, Blitz took off. Not running, but moving in a deliberate circuit, nose to the ground, tracing a path around the helicopter's tail. His gait was slow, purposeful, head dipping, then lifting in calibrated rhythm. It was a search pattern, one they'd practiced 100 times. Her heart began to thump in her throat. "What's he doing?" Howell asked. "Confirming," she said. "He's not guessing. He's tracking." More crew members had stopped now. Even Vance emerged from the cockpit to watch. Blitz made a full circle, then narrowed, zeroing in on the left side of the tail rotor assembly. He paused, nose lifted, then sat. Straight-backed. Still. Eyes focused on the exact point where the tail boom met the fuselage. Elena exhaled. "That's an alert." Howell swore under his breath. Vance approached her. "Your partner just grounded my bird." "Maybe he saved it," she replied. Blitz didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there like a statue carved from intuition itself, staring at something no one else could see. "We don't have time for theatrics, Sergeant." Lieutenant Grant Howell's voice cracked through the stillness like a whip. His boots struck the tarmac with clipped urgency as he advanced toward Elena, who remained crouched beside Blitz. Her hand resting lightly on the K-9's harness, her jaw clenched. "He's not performing," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off her partner. "He's alerting." Blitz hadn't moved an inch since sitting. Tail low, ears trained forward, posture erect. He wasn't whining, he wasn't shaking, he was certain. And Elena knew that posture. She'd learned it in the desert, in half-collapsed safe houses, in the belly of cargo planes that stank of diesel and tension. But Howell wasn't buying it. "Look," he continued, voice dropping only slightly, "we've got a state judge, 2 marshals, and a press liaison inbound. The motorcade's en route. If we miss this lift window—" Captain Miles Vance cut in sharply from the cockpit stairs. "If we don't lift now, we'll be chasing a new storm cell all the way through the canyon." He tugged off his helmet and ran a hand through damp hair, sweat and irritation mixing freely. "Either your mutt's gotta hang up with this model, or you're letting personal history get in the way of real-time decisions." Elena straightened, finally facing them. "He's never hesitated without cause." "Dogs react," Howell replied. "People make calls." There was a silence between them, the kind that settles between people who have drawn their lines and are deciding whether to cross them. Her hand returned to Blitz's head. He leaned slightly into it. Elena looked back at the tail section. It sat gleaming, immaculate. No unusual markings, no visible corrosion. Just carbon fiber and rivets. "You want to gamble a full crew and federal cargo on a gut feeling?" Vance asked, voice like a blade. That was the moment it hit her. Not just a gut feeling. A memory. It had been a winter op in the Cascades 5 years ago. A child was missing, snow falling fast. Elena and Blitz were on the second rotation, sweeping remote cabins. Standard procedure. Clear the perimeter, check heat signatures, move in. But when she opened the cabin door, Blitz refused to go in. He stood there, blocking her path. His ears were flat, tail low, and a deep growl rumbled low in his throat. Elena had pushed past him, her mistake. The moment she cracked the door open fully, the smell hit her, metallic and sharp. They pulled back and radioed fire services. A propane leak, near catastrophic levels. The cabin could have gone up with a single spark from her boot heel on the wooden floor. And Blitz had known. Not from scent alone, but some instinct she still couldn't explain. He'd sensed the wrongness in the air before any human tech could confirm it. She'd never doubted him again. Back in the present, the rain had begun to spit again, tiny needles dotting the tarmac. Howell shifted his stance, clearly calculating time lost. "I respect your record, Sergeant," he said tightly. "But we're about to blow a state-sanctioned air operation because your dog won't get on the bird." She looked at Blitz. His gaze was locked. Steady. He didn't fidget. He wasn't confused. He was deliberate. "I need 5 minutes," Helena said. "No, what you need is to comply." "If I'm wrong," she said, "dock me, ground me. But if I'm right, and we lift with something wrong on that tail, someone's going to die today." Howell's face was stone. He looked to Vance. The pilot exhaled hard, muttered something into his comms, then turned away with a sharp, "5 minutes. No more." "Go," she said to Blitz. With a soft grunt, he rose from his seated posture and resumed his circuit, nose once again scanning the radius of the tail boom. His movement was slow, but this time more focused, his attention narrowing toward the rear ventral seam panel, an area just beneath the rotor. Helena followed him, eyes sharp. He paused. Then his body dropped low, ears pinned back, tail straight. Another alert. Helena's voice rang out. "I need eyes on the rotor assembly tail seam, left side just above access panel 5. A technician jogged over. "That area's been cleared 3 times already." "I want a visual inspection now." The man hesitated, caught between duty and disbelief, but a nod from Howell sent him moving. Vance barked over the comms. "You got 3 minutes before I call launch anyway." Blitz stayed prone, breathing steady. Helena knelt beside him again, her voice low. "I need you to be right," she whispered, brushing his side. The tech climbed up with a flashlight and toolkit. Metal clicked. A brief silence. Then a whistle. The tech shouted down, "Got something." Everyone turned. "What kind of something?" Howell snapped. "Stress fracture, hairline, running along the panel seam into the tail rotor casing. You can't see it unless you peel back the heat shield." Helena felt her stomach drop. The tech continued, urgency rising. If that rotor started spinning under stress weather like this, could have caused catastrophic tail failure. Silence. Then the unmistakable hum of radios buzzing, orders being halted, rotor startup canceled. Howell's jaw locked tight. "Jesus." Helena didn't say "I told you so." She just exhaled, ran a hand down Blitz's back, and looked into the storm clouds rolling in over the canyon ridge. He had spoken the only way he knew how, and someone had finally listened. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the sky above Redwood Base hung like a coiled spring tense, dark, and full of things unsaid. Helena's fingers hovered over Blitz's harness buckle. Her heart was a metronome in overdrive. A wrong call here didn't just mean embarrassment. It meant delay, consequence, fallout. But worse than all that was the idea she might silence the one voice that had never once lied to her. She glanced back. Lieutenant Howell's jaw was clenched so tight the vein on his temple pulsed. Captain Vance stood by the nose of the helicopter, arms crossed, muttering into his comms. The crew watched from a careful distance, half out of protocol, half curiosity. No one moved. "Helena," Howell growled, "we are already over your 5 minutes." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down into Blitz's eyes, clear, sharp, unblinking. "Find it," she whispered, unclipping the harness with a click that echoed louder than it should have in the stillness. Blitz surged forward, low to the ground, moving like a shadow drawn by instinct. Off-leash, he shed the structure of command and shifted into what he truly was. A sentinel trained not just in obedience, but in discernment, reading air, space, silence. He moved methodically, not rushing. Around the nose cone first, nostrils flaring with each intake. The tips of his ears flicked with microscopic adjustments. Every so often his paws paused mid-step, an invisible calculation happening in his bones. Elena followed, 3 paces behind. Her breath fogged in the cold morning air. Blitz circled past the rear landing strut, hesitated near the fuel hatch, then veered toward the tail. The deeper into the aircraft's spine he traveled, the stiffer his posture became. The ground crew murmured behind her. "What's he doing?" "Acting weird." "No, that's methodical." Elena heard it all, let it all wash over her. But her focus was tunneled locked on the subtle language of a dog whose instincts had once saved her from a propane explosion, whose signals were often quieter than human voices but far more honest. Then he stopped, right at the tail rotor junction. A breath held, a twitch in his haunches. Then Blitz dropped low, chest to concrete, tail still, head raised, ears forward, formal alert posture. Elena's skin prickled. There was no bark, no frantic scratching, just stillness. Deliberate, practiced, unmistakable. The kind of silence that screams. The wind kicked up then, scattering dust across the tarmac. Somewhere overhead, a hawk cried out, brief, sharp, distant. But on the ground, time bent inward. The crew went still. Captain Vance stopped mid-sentence. Howell's radio crackled in his hand, unanswered. Everyone turned to stare at the dog, who said more by laying down than any of them could with words. "Son of a bitch," Vance muttered, stepping forward. Elena didn't move. She didn't need to. Blitz had spoken. Howell's boots approached slowly, deliberately. He looked down at Blitz, then back at her. "You sure?" "I've never seen him bluff," Elena said quietly. "He doesn't alert for nothing." A tech moved toward the tail, flashlight already in hand, face pale. "Someone needs to peel the heat shield," Elena called, voice sharper now. "Rotor assembly's under tension. If it's cracked—" "We lift," Vance interrupted. "That thing snaps at 300 RPM and we drop into the river like a rock." Another voice from the security shack came through the open comms. "Inbound motorcade is 2 clicks out. Judge Ward will be exposed in 12 minutes if we don't initiate launch." Elena didn't blink. "You launch now, you're gambling with her life." Howell's face darkened, but beneath the frustration something gave way. A crack in the certainty, a sliver of respect for a dog who wouldn't move. Blitz remained still, like a soldier guarding a landmine only he could see. The silence deepened, not just around the aircraft, but in the room between command and instinct, between what was ordered and what was true. Then came the wrench of metal being unscrewed. A tech popped open the side seam, and the moment his light hit the rotor casing, the color drained from his face. "Sir, we've got a fracture," he called out, voice tight, "running deep into the rotor spine. If we'd lifted, tail failure was guaranteed." Gasps. A curse. Captain Vance took 2 steps back, exhaling hard. Howell turned away, hands on hips, muttering to himself. But Elena? She just knelt beside Blitz and brushed her fingers down his flank. "Good boy," she whispered. Her voice cracked as she said it. "You just saved lives." Blitz finally stood, shook off the tension like dust from his coat, and looked up at her with quiet confidence. No fanfare, no pride, just the job, just the truth. He'd spoken in silence, and the world this time had listened. A heavy stillness blanketed the helipad. The rotors had long stopped spinning, but the air around the grounded chopper felt heavier now, thick with the weight of what could have happened. Under the midday haze, the mechanics moved fast but careful, every movement tense, deliberate. Their eyes flicked between instruments and panels as if the aircraft itself might bite back. Captain Miles Vance stood over them, arms crossed, jaw locked so tightly it seemed wired shut. He wasn't barking orders now. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. One tech, Reyes, pulled his cap lower to block the sun as he slid under the tail boom, flashlight in hand. Another, Jenkins, stood nearby with a portable X-ray scanner, already warmed and humming softly. Lieutenant Elena Marlowe kept her distance, hand resting on Blitz's collar. She didn't need to restrain him. He was calm now. But she needed the contact. The warmth of his fur grounded her, gave her something real to hold on to in the storm of doubt and adrenaline still pumping through her chest. Reyes called out first. "Panel 7B open. Starting visual." There was a click of metal and a faint groan as he slid the panel from the tail assembly and rested it against the concrete. The exposed interior looked clean, pristine even. "Nothing obvious," he said, voice muffled from beneath the chopper. "No scoring, no foreign debris." Captain Vance didn't move. "Check the control linkage. Section 2. Reyes adjusted his flashlight, angling it deeper into the metal shell. Then he froze. "Wait." He leaned closer, slowly. A breath held, a heartbeat passed. "We've got a line," he said, quieter now. "Hair thin, just above the actuator housing." Jenkins crouched beside him, threading the X-ray probe along the panel seam. The screen lit up in gray and blue gradients, and as it refreshed, the truth came into view. A hairline fracture, precisely where the tail rotor's control rod transferred torque, nearly invisible from the outside, but deep enough to be lethal at flight RPM. It wasn't sabotage, not exactly, it wasn't dramatic, but it didn't need to be. One stress shift midair, one hard maneuver, and the entire tail could have sheared free. They'd have spiraled out of the sky in seconds. "Son of a," Reyes whispered. "You wouldn't see this unless you were looking right at it." Elena's heart thudded against her rib cage. Blitz stood still at her side, but she could feel the tension vibrating through him like a tuning fork. He knew. He'd known all along. "Confirm fracture depth," Vance said, his voice low but shaking. Jenkins replied, "About 0.8 millimeters deep, extends laterally 3 inches. That's enough." Silence again. Captain Vance looked up slowly, his eyes finding Elena across the tarmac. No more scorn, no more impatience. Just a long, quiet moment of reckoning. "You grounded us in time," he said, almost a whisper. Elena didn't speak. She looked down at Blitz instead, who was watching the men beneath the aircraft with calm, unreadable eyes, like it was never in doubt. But inside Elena, a knot loosened. Her chest expanded with a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the moment Blitz froze near the tail. He was right. Again. Just like in Tennessee, when he'd refused to enter that hunting cabin until she checked the propane tank and found the leak. Just like outside the stadium, when he alerted on a duffel bag no one had flagged containing enough explosive to level 3 city blocks. But this felt closer, more fragile, because this time they'd all doubted him, even her. Reyes crawled out from under the chopper, brushing off his hands. "This could have killed you," he muttered to no one in particular. Vance nodded. "Scrub the entire tail assembly. I want full diagnostic across every junction point and an independent audit. Bring in the state contractor if you have to." He turned to Elena. "There'll be an investigation. We'll need to know how this got missed." She didn't nod. She was still watching the men work. Her hand moved to Blitz's ears, rubbing gently behind them. He leaned into her without looking, as if to say, "Now do you believe me?" "You saved her life," she said softly. Vance raised a brow. "Who?" "Judge Ward," Elena answered, voice distant. "She would have been mid-air with us in 10 minutes. Vance looked down. Guess that makes him the quietest bodyguard she never met. The other techs gave small nods. One of them, Jenkins, offered a soft, almost reverent glance toward Blitz. He picked it up with no sound, no cue, he said. "It's not just training, that's something else." Elena didn't answer. Not directly. But in her mind, the words echoed. It's not just training, it's trust. The kind that forms over hundreds of quiet moments no one else sees. Over long nights in the desert, slow patrols through city blocks, silent rides in choppers just like this one. Trust formed not by command, but by knowing and being known. Vance finally broke the silence. "We'll be grounded for at least another 6 hours. They're sending a replacement bird from North Sector. You're staying on the detail, Marlowe. So is Blitz." She looked at him. "You sure?" He gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "He's the only reason we're all still standing." The hangar lights buzzed faintly above, their pale wash settling over the grounded helicopter like a spotlight on a crime scene. The tail rotor, once a blur of rotation and lift, now lay still and partially disassembled, its inner mechanics laid bare, as if the aircraft had finally confessed something it had been hiding. Captain Miles Vance stood off to the side, headset looped around his neck, pacing in slow, tight steps. His knuckles were pale from clenching a clipboard, and his normally cool demeanor was beginning to fracture. Across the floor, Flight Safety Chief Raymond Keller arrived, broad-shouldered in his 60s, with crow's feet that looked carved from 1,000 late nights spent studying black box data and wreckage reports. He didn't speak at first, just motioned to the technicians, who brought over a tablet loaded with diagnostic readouts and internal scans of the tail section. Keller reviewed the data with the precision of a man who had learned the language of disaster the hard way by studying the aftermath. He tapped the screen once, zoomed in, then again. A deeper scan, the control rod. There it was, hairline, nearly imperceptible unless you knew where to look. But once you saw it, you could not see it. "Run me the strain tolerance at 160 knots, level 3 turbulence," Keller said flatly. Reyes keyed the values. The software simulated the flight path they'd been scheduled to take, tight altitude corridors through crosswinds, a quick climb for the ridge crossing. The numbers populated on the screen. Then they went red. "Jesus Christ," Vance muttered. Keller just stared at it, then slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It would have failed," Keller said finally. His voice was low, not for drama, but because anything louder would have cracked the moment wide open. 15 minutes into flight, maybe less. The stress from turbulence at that altitude, it would have sheared the rod clean. He looked up. Tail rotor loss means unrecoverable spin. In a UH-72, you're not auto-rotating out of that. You'd be dead before you hit the ground. The words hung in the air like a dropped wrench. Elena, standing quietly nearby with Blitz at her feet, didn't blink. But she felt it in her spine, in that space where adrenaline still lingered. The what if, the almost. "We weren't even going to re-inspect the tail," Vance said, mostly to himself. "We swept it yesterday. Got the all clear from diagnostics." "Diagnostics don't smell metal fatigue," Keller replied. Dogs do, apparently. He turned to Elena. Your partner just saved at least 6 lives, maybe more depending on who was flying escort. Elena gave a slow nod, but her voice stayed soft. He tried to tell us earlier. He knew. I just didn't want to push until I was sure. Keller's gaze sharpened. You pushed exactly when you needed to. That's what makes you worth trusting. He flipped the tablet around to show her. You see this crack? At full vibration load, it propagates in less than 3 minutes. One bump of turbulence and the tail loses control authority. It spins you like a drill bit. Pilot has maybe 5 seconds to react. And that's if he's a magician. Captain Vance exhaled hard. So we would have lost the tail? And with Judge Ward on board? Keller looked directly at him. You'd have lost your crew, your K-9, the judge, the press liaisons, and you'd be on the news in body bags. Vance rubbed his jaw. For once there was no defense, no deflection, just a haunted silence as the weight of what nearly happened sank in. Keller turned back to Elena. His voice dropped lower. I've seen these fractures go unnoticed before. The worst was in Colorado 3 years ago. Similar bird. Tail gave out over the canyon. They never found all the wreckage. Elena's grip on Blitz's collar tightened slightly, not from fear, but from gratitude. Raw, aching gratitude. Blitz, ever still, rested his head lightly against her knee. She lowered a hand and pressed into his fur. It was warm, grounding. You understand now why I said no, she said quietly to Vance. He nodded. I do. A long pause. Blitz will fly in my seat if he wants to from now on. Elena didn't smile, but she blinked hard, once. Another technician approached, holding a small tray with the extracted control rod. Keller took it carefully, inspecting the fracture with a magnifier. The crack gleamed under the workshop light like a threat that never got its chance to scream. If this was sabotage, Keller muttered, it was smart, precise, subtle. But part of me thinks we're just lucky the metal spoke before it snapped. Or maybe, Elena thought, it wasn't the metal that spoke. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was Blitz's nose picking up the change in vibration, the faint shift in pressure or temperature around the flaw. Or maybe it was something deeper, a bond beyond language, a trust that had been forged in harder places where there were no briefings or simulations, just life, breath, and the quiet pull between two living beings who understood each other without needing a reason. Keller set the cracked rod down and looked around at the room. We dodged death by 5 minutes today, he said quietly. 5. And just like that, everyone was silent again. The kind of silence that only comes after a brush with something unforgiving. The kind that makes you walk slower, speak softer, live differently. The cracked control rod sat alone on the stainless steel tray under a cold overhead lamp. No longer just a mechanical fault, but now a question. Elena stood over it with arms crossed, her jaw tight. Blitz sat beside her, eyes tracking every technician that passed, alert but still. Keller hadn't said anything for a while. He was bent over the fracture with a jeweler's loupe and a probe light. Behind him, 2 aviation mechanics held their breath. Even Vance stood nearby, arms slack, as if the silence itself might accuse them. Then Keller straightened, his thumb traced along the brake once more, slower this time. This isn't fatigue, he muttered. Elena's head turned. What? Keller adjusted the magnifier and turned the rod in the tray to show the underside barely visible were a series of faint scrapes, too deliberate to be incidental. "You see that scarring pattern?" he asked, voice low. "Those aren't from vibration. That's pressure. Concentrated." He took a step back. Something wedged or pried against the housing, enough to start a stress line, but quiet, controlled, like they wanted it to fail eventually, just not right away. Elena's blood went cold. "Are you saying someone did this?" Keller didn't answer right away. He looked at her with a steady gaze. "I'm saying it wasn't time and where. This kind of pattern doesn't show up by accident." Captain Vance took a step forward, suddenly serious. "Are you implying sabotage?" "No," Keller replied, eyes still on Elena. "I'm saying we need to rule it out, fast." Elena's spine straightened, her instincts catching up to what her gut had whispered since this morning. The off feeling, the tension in the briefing, the way Blitz had frozen. It was all connected. She turned on her heel. "Where's your security chief?" Vance blinked, caught off guard by her tone. What?" "Right now. I need access to the hangar surveillance, entry logs, maintenance records." "That's a big ask," he began, but Keller cut in. "Grant, get her what she needs. If someone tampered with our aircraft, we've got bigger problems than a busted rotor." Elena was already halfway to the comm panel on the wall. The room was dim and humming with cooling fans lined with monitors and a central table surrounded by screens. A man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, Security Chief Dennis Kroll, stood rigidly as Elena entered. He didn't like civilians or non-ranking military for that matter, but Keller's urgent message had clearly overruled his instinct to stall. "We've pulled the past 72 hours of footage on Hangar Bay 3, Kroll said, motioning to the screen. Elena leaned in. A time-stamped view of the UH-72 helicopter displayed across multiple angles. Wide angle from above, a rear view on the tail, and motion-detect cameras mounted at the hangar doors. "Who had authorized access?" she asked. "Scheduled maintenance team. 2 overnight techs. No irregular pings. Entry logs match badge swipes," Kroll said. "But we're cross-checking badge IDs against facial recognition just in case." "Good," she muttered. Her eyes didn't leave the feed. On the screen, time-lapse footage ticked by. A technician crouched by the tail rotor, another wheeled over a toolbox. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. But then, "Pause. Go back 2 frames," Elena said sharply. The screen jumped back. A lone figure, face obscured under a hoodie unusual for indoor gear, crouched at the rotor housing. His motions were swift, deliberate. One gloved hand reached into the cavity where the rod would be housed. The action took only a few seconds. Then he stood, calmly walked away, leaving no mess, no broken protocol, nothing that would have raised suspicion. "That's not one of your regular crew," Elena whispered. Kroll narrowed his eyes. "That's not anyone I recognize." He immediately picked up the phone. "This is Kroll. Initiate badge ID lockdown. Cross-verify all entry from 2200 hours 2 nights ago until this morning. I want every swipe mapped to a face." Vance stepped beside Elena, tension growing in his throat. If that was sabotage, it was surgical. "And bold," Elena replied. "They knew the chopper's schedule, knew exactly which part to target for a delayed failure. That's not vandalism. That's an attempt at silencing." "Silencing who?" Vance asked. "Us? The judge?" Elena turned to him. "That's what we need to find out." Behind her, Blitz let out a soft exhale and shifted, eyes locked on the static-filled screen like he too understood something dangerous had entered the frame. The wind had picked up. A storm was forming at the horizon. Elena leaned against a railing outside, hand resting absently on Blitz's shoulder as he sat beside her. "Someone tried to kill us," she said softly. Not to anyone in particular. Blitz looked up at her. Just a flicker of motion, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. She took a deep breath. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The hum of the monitors filled the surveillance room, steady and low like a machine breathing in its sleep. Chief Kroll leaned forward, squinting at the timestamp blinking in the lower corner of the screen. 02:17:46 a.m. The footage was grainy, pulled from the side-angle camera that oversaw the rear personnel entrance of Hangar Bay 3. Under the sodium lights, a lone figure appeared, badge held low, hoodie up. The system accepted the swipe without hesitation. Ryan Denton, contractor, civilian HVAC and electrical systems. Access level, limited, granted temporary override, 72-hour maintenance window. Kroll's fingers tapped the edge of the console. "That's your guy. Clear swipe. Entered 2 nights ago. Exactly the time window we've isolated." Elena stared at the footage. Ryan Denton moved with the technician's rhythm efficient, not hurried, not aimless. He carried a tool roll, not a case. Stopped once to check his phone. Paused just outside the camera's frame, then entered the hangar. No signs of panic. No fumbling. Just enough ordinary to be forgettable. But something about the way he moved. Elena narrowed her eyes. Why would HVAC need to access the rear of the tail rotor assembly? She asked quietly. Kroll blew out a breath. They wouldn't. Not unless there was a specific issue logged, and there wasn't. She didn't reply immediately. Her gaze was still fixed on the looping footage, frame by frame. The timestamp nagged at her. 2:17 a.m. Dead hour. Shift change window. Fewer eyes, fewer questions. Then Kroll tapped the log. "Here's the part that really sings." He brought up the tail rotor inspection schedule. Denton accessed the hangar 4 hours before the routine maintenance team. His badge registered entry, but no recorded exit. Elena looked up. "He didn't badge out?" Kroll shook his head. "Not through any official checkpoint. Only exit scan that night was the primary janitorial crew at 4:36 a.m. She leaned back, arms crossed. Then either he used a blind spot exit, or he was let out by someone with override. "And that," Kroll said, voice tightening, "is what makes me nervous." Vance, Howell, Keller, and Elena gathered around the small operations screen near the hangar bay's administrative office. The image of Denton hovered in freeze frame. The room was quiet, filled with the slow creak of metal expanding under the sun. "Ryan Denton," Vance said, reading off a summary. 39. Contracted 6 months ago for wiring retrofits. Clean record. Veteran, Air Force. No flags in his background check. "No flags," Elena repeated under her breath. "And yet he's accessing restricted zones at 2:17 a.m. without a job ticket and disappearing off the exit logs." Howell leaned against the frame of the doorway, arms folded, his skepticism visible but restrained. "Could still be a mistake," he muttered. "Badge errors aren't uncommon in this place." Elena turned to him. He accessed the same quadrant where Blitz picked up the alert. He bypassed tail rotor safety, logged nothing, and left no trace. And the crack intentional. Keller nodded slowly. "We found micro-abrasion patterns on the housing, small enough to miss during inspection, large enough to initiate a catastrophic failure under rotor stress." "Sabotage," Vance said aloud, the word sounding heavier in the air than it had in his mind. Elena's eyes didn't leave the screen. The question is, why target this flight? No one answered. She stepped forward, tapped the freeze frame. Zoom in here. On his shoulder. The patch. Kroll clicked. A faint outline of an emblem appeared on the contractor's jacket. Not standard issue maintenance. A private security logo, Aegis Core Risk Management. Vance blinked. That's not one of ours. Definitely not, Keller confirmed. Private military outfit. Specializes in executive transport and security logistics. I've seen them around black site perimeters, not maintenance decks. Elena felt it settle in her chest like weight. Then why is a contractor with ties to paramilitary security entering a flight zone carrying a tool roll and sabotaging a tail rotor set to escort Judge Evelyn Ward? She said the judge's name like a lock clicking open. Everyone turned. Ward. The high-profile federal judge with a record of indicting corporate defense contractors and pushing procurement oversight into military budgets. Howell broke the silence. The summit. Elena nodded slowly. She's scheduled to speak about reforming no-bid security contracts, exactly the kind Aegis Core profits from. Another silence, but this time it was electric. Blitz let out a low, quiet growl from the corner, barely audible. His ears were forward, eyes locked on the flickering monitor, a still image, yet he seemed to know. Someone wanted her to go down in that flight, Keller murmured. Elena replied softly, and they would have called it pilot error, rotor failure, nothing traceable. Vance exhaled. Until Blitz changed the timeline. Outside, hangar steps. Elena stepped outside with Blitz, sunlight slanting across the tarmac in long amber lines. She knelt beside him, fingers tracing the ridge of his harness. "You did more than just stop a tragedy," she whispered, her voice barely above the wind. "You exposed something no one was meant to see." Blitz turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes, not seeking praise, not questioning. Just present, just steady, the same way he always was when everything else began to shift. Elena looked back at the door behind them. Now she knew the name, the face, the time, but the motive that went higher than just one contractor. She had no doubt. Someone had opened a door at 2:17 a.m. Now she had to walk through it. The air at the station felt heavy, like it hadn't yet decided whether to rain or choke. A storm threatened the horizon, the kind that made windshields blur and radios static out into silence, the kind that always came before something broke. The terminal was mostly quiet. A few passengers milled by vending machines. An old man napped against his duffel. A mother juggled twin toddlers near Gate 4. Everything looked ordinary. That's what bothered Elena the most. From the surveillance van parked across the street, she scanned the interior through a narrow slit of tinted glass, her fingers resting lightly on Blitz's harness. His body was coiled, still, breath controlled, nose twitching. Her comm crackled. "Unit 2, we have visual confirmation. Row 6, gray hoodie, black duffel, Ryan Denton. Ticket says Seattle outbound, 10:05. Orders?" She responded low. "Hold visual. Do not engage until my signal." The inside of the van smelled like coffee and rain-damp Kevlar. Blitz hadn't moved in the last 3 minutes. But Elena could feel the hum building in him like a taut wire. A pressure. His ears flicked once, then his body shifted. Posture changed. Weight forward, hackles faintly lifted, nose locked to the glass. The low growl rumbled in his chest like the first throat of thunder. Elena whispered, "You see him." He didn't blink. Denton stood in line, shoulders hunched. The duffel was slung tight against him. No tags, no identifiers. He wasn't checking the monitors, wasn't looking at the security cameras. But his feet kept shifting, like he knew. From the far doors, two officers in plain clothes stepped in, subtle, one positioned by the snack machines, the other near the ticket desk. Then Denton turned. He caught the shape of the van through the glass, and he ran. "Go!" Elena threw the van doors open in one sharp motion. Blitz leapt from the van before she hit the ground, the leash unhooked mid-stride. He moved like a pulse-slow, fast, exact, the kind of speed that wasn't reckless. It was built, trained, an arrow with breath. Denton bolted across the lot, duffel bouncing against his spine, feet slapping concrete in blind panic. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Blitz's growl echoed behind him. By the time he reached the alley behind the station, his lungs were raw and his choices gone. He skidded to a stop near a dumpster and turned. Blitz was there, but he didn't lunge. He froze, front legs locked, shoulders stiff, head down, that same stance Elena had seen back on the tarmac. Eyes locked, unmoving. Denton dropped the bag, both hands up. He looked at the dog like he was staring down a weapon, a silent one that didn't bark because it didn't need to. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said quickly, voice cracking. "I swear I didn't think—" The words died in his mouth when Elena stepped into view. She didn't raise her gun. She didn't have to. "Blitz?" she called calmly. The dog didn't look at her. He stayed frozen, waiting. Elena walked forward slowly, like lowering into deep water. Denton's breath hitched. You're the handler," she nodded. "And he's the one who stopped your sabotage before it killed 5 people. He swallowed. I didn't set the timeline. They told me it would be removed before the flight." "Who's they?" she asked sharply. He hesitated. Blitz's tail twitched once. Not wagging, just a warning. Denton exhaled. "I just did the prep. I didn't know Ward would be on board. I thought it was a routine op. Message sending. No casualties." Elena's face didn't change. "That rotor crack," she said, "wasn't a message. It was a death sentence. You knew what you were doing." He didn't argue. From behind, the officers arrived. They cuffed him without a word. He didn't resist, didn't even blink when they pulled the duffel open. Inside, cash, burner phone. A printed schematic of the rear rotor control rod assembly, circled in red. Elena watched as Denton was led away. She looked down at Blitz, still locked in position, still watching the retreating figure with a kind of cold certainty. "You knew he wouldn't run far," she murmured. Blitz finally relaxed, chest rising with a single long breath. Then he looked up at her, just once, and sat. Back in the van. Later. The rain had started now, tapping against the roof like fingertips. Elena sat in the rear of the van, Blitz beside her, towel draped over his back. He leaned slightly into her thigh, not for warmth, but for grounding. She stared at the evidence bag, the schematic, the duffel. The printed schedule Denton had stuffed into the front pocket. Flight manifests, personnel logs, too specific for coincidence, too surgical for protest. Someone had lined it all up, someone who thought the dog wouldn't catch it. Elena ran a hand down Blitz's head slowly. "They never count on instinct," she whispered. Blitz closed his eyes. The room was intentionally sparse. White walls, metal table, one chair occupied, the other left hauntingly vacant. Ryan Denton sat hunched, eyes flicking to every corner of the space as though trying to count exits that weren't there. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, the unraveling of certainty. Behind a mirrored wall, Elena stood, arms crossed. Blitz lay silently beside her, eyes trained through the glass. He hadn't moved since they entered. He didn't need to. Denton saw him. Even through the one-way mirror, even without full view, he knew. His breath hitched the moment his gaze swept the panel. His spine stiffened, jaw locked. But it was the eyes, a flicker of recognition, followed by the unmistakable tightness of guilt. "He sees him," murmured Keller, standing beside Elena. "Doesn't even know why that scares him more than handcuffs." "He remembers the tail rotor," Elena replied quietly. "And who stopped him?" Inside the room, Agent Brooks leaned forward across the table. "Ryan," he said with unnerving calm, "you're not going anywhere today. That much is obvious. But whether you leave this room as a criminal or as someone who got used, that's still up to you." Denton said nothing. Then, eyes still fixed on the mirror, he whispered, "Is he watching me?" Brooks didn't answer. The silence did it for him. Denton swallowed hard, palms pressed against the metal table. "It wasn't supposed to go like this." He said it as if repeating a line he'd been rehearsing, as if saying it enough times could rewind the moment. Brooks stayed still. "Go on." "They told me it was a delay tactic, that's all. A hairline compromise and the tail rotor control barely noticeable. Would get caught in the pre-flight or push back departure by a day. Enough to screw the logistics for Ward's team." Elena's fingers curled slightly at the mention of Ward. Denton's voice grew thinner, rawer. "They showed me how. Said no one would get hurt. That the integrity was still sound unless flown into turbulence. I didn't think they'd actually let it go up. And who's they?" He hesitated, then broke. "Northrise Aviation," he said, eyes dropping to the table. "They've been trying to shut Ward's field contracts down for over a year. Said if he succeeded on this disaster response bid, they'd lose 4 federal service routes. Millions lost to a K-9 team that shouldn't even exist." He looked back toward the mirror again. "Ward's dogs embarrassed them, that's the truth." Brooks leaned in slightly. "So you were the message?" Denton shook his head. "I was just the technician, a contractor. I owed them favors, gambling debts. I didn't even sign anything. It was all verbal. 2 minutes in the hangar, 1 hairline breach with a torque spike and a microfracture file. That's it." "And what if Blitz hadn't caught it?" Denton looked sick. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Finally his voice cracked. He shouldn't have known. No one should have. But he did. Behind the mirror, Blitz remained still, his eyes heavy, not judgmental, not triumphant, just watching. Elena couldn't tear her gaze away from Denton's face. The panic, the confession, the realization that his silence would have killed people, would have killed her. Brooks stood slowly, pressing his hands into the table as he stared Denton down. "You tampered with federal flight hardware during active deployment preparation. You would have taken down 6 lives in a $27 million aircraft. You think that's a message?" Denton finally broke eye contact. "I didn't know Ward's daughter was in the command chain," he whispered. "Didn't know she'd be on board." That hit Elena squarely in the chest. So that was it. The only thing that made Denton flinch wasn't the death. It was the potential backlash. Brooks tapped on the table once. "You're going to name every contact at Northrise. And you're going to do it today." Denton nodded faintly, voice hoarse. "Yes, sir." As Brooks exited, he turned toward the mirrored wall. "I hope you understand," he said softly, more to Elena than anyone else. "Your dog just prevented a national investigation from becoming a memorial." She looked down at Blitz, and Blitz, without prompt, nudged her thigh with the gentlest touch of his nose, not seeking reward, just confirming her stillness. Elena closed her eyes for half a beat, then nodded once. "Yeah," she murmured. "He always knows before we do." Ryan Denton sat with his arms crossed tightly, as if trying to hold his own body together. His leg bounced, a nervous, rhythmic tapping against the floor tiles. The kind of tic born not from guilt alone, but from the terrifying awareness that maybe, just maybe, this time he hadn't understood what he was part of. Across the table, Elena leaned in, voice steady, not aggressive, not shouting worse than that. Controlled, measured. "You need to stop saying it wasn't meant to hurt anyone," she said, "because we both know that isn't true anymore." Denton shook his head. "You don't get it. Northrise didn't want blood. They wanted egg on Ward's face, a delay, a setback during a high-profile deployment. If his aircraft was grounded, if questions came up about K-9 certification, they could start arguing public safety concerns, maybe even pull federal attention away from his unit." He let out a shaky breath. "I didn't sign up to crash a bird. I signed up to stall one." Elena's jaw locked. Her eyes didn't waver. "Did you even check the weather?" Denton blinked. "What?" "The forecast that morning," she pressed. "Category 2 storm system forming off Sitka. Wind shear estimates spiking. Crosswinds at altitude expected to hit 60. You know what that means for a compromised tail rotor assembly?" He didn't answer, so she gave him one. "It means the control rod fails in the first 10 minutes of turbulence. The tail rotor disengages. The pilot loses yaw authority. The aircraft spins out. No recovery. Everyone on board dies still strapped to their harness." Denton went pale. "But they weren't supposed to fly in bad weather." "No!" Elena cut in sharply. "They were supposed to rescue families trapped on an outer island. That's what this mission was about. That's what you sabotaged." He swallowed hard, and for the first time since the arrest, a shift happened, not defiance, not even shame. It was dread, the slow, dawning realization that intent doesn't matter when consequences bear teeth. "They told me it'd be flagged on pre-check, that a technician would catch the anomaly before takeoff. They said your dogs were a crutch, that Ward's whole system was too dependent on instinct, not protocol." Elena gave a faint, bitter laugh. "And you thought you'd prove them right by faking a mechanical failure?" Denton was breathing faster now. "I didn't think it would go that far. I thought Blitz would smell something or someone would notice." "But what if we hadn't?" she pressed. He said nothing, so she leaned closer, voice now low, razor-edged. "If Blitz had hesitated for 5 fewer seconds, if I'd been one order more obedient to Howell, we would have been in the air when it snapped." Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, brokenly, Denton whispered, "God." He buried his face in his hands. "I thought it was pressure on a machine. Turns out it was a noose." Outside the room, Captain Miles Vance stood against the glass, arms folded tight. Next to him, Keller shook his head. "They never think they're pulling the trigger," Keller murmured. "Just loading the chamber for someone else." Vance didn't speak, but his hand, one of the few in the unit who'd actually logged over 2,000 hours in those helicopters, curled slightly into a fist. "I'd rather face enemy fire than internal sabotage," he finally muttered. Back inside, Elena rose slowly from the table. Blitz wasn't with her this time. He didn't need to be. The weight of truth had already settled like lead in the room. "You're lucky we listened to our dogs," she said, stepping back toward the door. "Because they're the only ones left who don't lie to us." Denton didn't look up. She didn't expect him to, but just before the door clicked shut behind her, his voice came out, almost childlike. "Do you think they would have survived if they flew?" Elena paused in the doorway and gave the truth its due. No. The light filtering through the side panels of Hangar 4 was the color of cold steel, muted, metallic, solemn. The air still smelled faintly of hydraulic oil and ozone, but something deeper lingered now. Not quite fear, not relief either. It was the ghost of a disaster that never happened, hovering, invisible, but too close for comfort. Captain Miles Vance knelt beside the disassembled tail rotor housing, fingers tracing the narrow, spider-veined crack on the control rod. The fracture was so subtle it looked like a shadow, until the light hit it just right. Then it gleamed like a fault line waiting to split the earth. Mechanic Cooper turned the flashlight slightly, his voice low. This would have failed even in mild crosswinds, definitely under light shear. "How soon?" Elena asked. Cooper didn't look at her. He just pointed. "Rotor speed's highest during hover ascent, but in turbulence, tail input spike this joint was already at 80% failure when we pulled it. Under stress," he exhaled sharply. "Maybe 4 minutes into flight, maybe 2. Elena looked away for a moment. She didn't need to picture the result. She already had. In a smaller side office, the tension thinned just enough to breathe. Dr. Maris Sato, the unit's civilian biomechanics consultant, tapped her pen on a laminated diagram of the canine sensory matrix. "You were right to trust Blitz. Again." Elena folded her arms, still rattled, though she hid it well. "Some people still think it's voodoo." Sato offered a dry smile. "Science used to call lightning an omen." She picked up a chart one that mapped canine olfactory receptors against known chemical compounds. "What Blitz did wasn't magic. It's molecular discrimination." "Explain like I'm not wearing a lab coat," Vance quipped from the doorway. Sato gestured with the chart. "When metals begin to fracture, especially titanium alloys, they release microscopic particulates, oxidation. At the stress points emits compounds that mix with lubricants and trace materials used in maintenance. Dogs like Blitz can detect those scent shifts before any machine can pick them up." She looked at Elena. "Especially if they've been trained to associate molecular anomalies with alert cues." "Like stepping backward," Elena said quietly. Sato nodded. "Exactly. That wasn't panic. That was a diagnostic signal." Vance raised an eyebrow. "And this doesn't spook you?" Sato paused, then shook her head. "No. You know why?" She held up the diagram. "Humans have 6 million scent receptors. German Shepherds have over 225 million. Their brains devote 40 times more capacity to smell than ours. They aren't guessing. They're reading data we've never had access to." Elena gave a faint smile. "It's not magic. It's evolution." "Exactly," Sato said. "It's survival, honed over thousands of years, and finally aimed at a target that matters." Back in the hangar, Blitz stood quietly near the edge of the safety line, his eyes tracking the team as they repacked the rotor. He didn't look triumphant. He never did. To him, this wasn't a victory. It was just work, a signal, a job done right. Elena knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You knew before any of us," she murmured. "You always do." Blitz leaned gently into her palm. A quiet affirmation. He didn't need medals or parades, just the knowledge that she trusted him, and that today that trust had saved lives. By nightfall, the airstrip was quieter than it should have been. The rotor blades that had spun all day now sat still, like silent reminders of what hadn't happened. Ground crews stood in huddled clusters, voices low, movements restrained. Even the wind seemed to tread softly. The chain reaction had already begun. Every flight involving VIP transport grounded indefinitely. Every mechanic and contractor under scrutiny. Access logs, badge scans, security footage from the past 72 hours, locked down and tagged for forensics. 2 scheduled missions rerouted, 3 more canceled outright. It wasn't panic. It was precision, military precision activated not by a human whistleblower but by a single silent signal from a dog. Elena stood near the hangar doors, clipboard forgotten in one hand, watching operations fold inward like a tide retreating from something it hadn't yet named. Across the tarmac, Keller briefed a small task force. Captain Vance was on a secure call in the comms van. Howell paced near the helipad, his usual impatience dissolved into something closer to respect. The message had spread fast. Not just there could have been sabotage, but we almost flew into it. A black SUV pulled in just after sunset, unmarked, but known. Inside sat Judge Helen Ward Oversight Authority on Military Aviation Compliance, and the only civilian with clearance to freeze operations across all state-run airborne deployments. She rarely made appearances herself. Tonight, she had. Elena stepped forward to greet her, but was waved off gently by a suited aide. She asked for Blitz. A pause. Only him. Elena glanced down. Blitz was already sitting up, ears forward, posture alert, not aggressive, not anxious, just aware, present. She unhooked his leash and gave a soft nudge to his shoulder. Go on. He walked ahead slowly, his paws quiet on the concrete, body still as windless air. Ward stood alone at the rear of the SUV, her cane balanced against the bumper. She didn't move as Blitz approached, only lowered herself carefully to a crouch, her long coat pooling around her. No words, no commands. Blitz stopped beside her and sat. The 2 figures, woman and dog, stayed like that for a long moment. No motion, no audience. And then, just once, Ward reached out, brushing her fingers gently across Blitz's cheek. Not a pat. Not praise, just contact. A human recognition of something no machine could have measured. I owe you more than I'll ever be able to say, she said at last, and less than you'll ever need. Blitz blinked. Nothing more. But Elena, watching from 20 yards back, felt her throat tighten, because that right there was the closest anyone would ever come to a medal ceremony in this place. And Blitz, he didn't want the spotlight. He only wanted the truth to be heard, however silently. Inside Ops Command, a red folder was stamped Priority, Internal. The first page read, Recommended, Full Protocol Audit. Security Restructuring. Personnel Review. Temporary suspension of contractor access, pending outcome. The second page was blank, except for a single quote typed at the center. Sometimes the most urgent voice isn't the loudest. It's the one that stands still and refuses to move. Below it, in neat ink, J. Ward. The air inside the room didn't move. Not because of broken ventilation, just the kind of silence that hangs when something has been narrowly avoided, but not forgotten. Lieutenant Howell stood at parade rest across from Colonel Strickland, a man who rarely raised his voice because he didn't need to. His words cut cleaner when quiet. You don't override instinct protocol again. Not with her. Not with that dog. Howell's jaw flexed. Yes, sir. Strickland didn't blink. This isn't about embarrassment, Lieutenant. It's about the fact that your impatience almost got a Medal of Valor pilot killed. A flicker passed over Howell's face, pride, bruised where anger had once lived. You were cleared for field rank because you know pressure. But judgment under pressure? Strickland took a step closer, lowering his voice. That's something Blitz knows better than you. Another beat. Dismissed. Howell saluted, turned, walked out with shoulders square but eyes dimmed. And just like that, the fault line was marked not as blame, but as a reminder of how close they'd come. Elena sat alone in a room 3 stories above the hangars, facing 3 men and 1 woman in pressed uniforms. On the table before her were 2 folders, a playback monitor, and a small audio recorder with the red light blinking. The woman to the right, General Ainsley, leaned forward. We've read the logs, we've watched the footage, but we'd like to hear it from you directly, Officer Morales. Elena nodded. The man in the center, Brigadier Howell, no relation, folded his hands. When the checklist cleared and Blitz did not, why did you stall the flight? A breath, not defensive, not proud, just calm. Because I've learned that a checklist is only as good as the humans who wrote it, Elena said. Blitz doesn't care about protocol. He cares about what's real. General Ainsley's brow lifted, not in disapproval, but curiosity. Elena went on, voice steady. I've seen him freeze at the scent of nitrates no human could have picked up. I've watched him refuse entry to a sealed cabin. 3 hours later, we found a slow propane leak that would have combusted with 1 spark. She met their eyes. I don't override his silence. A pause settled. Then Ainsley asked quietly, Do you think most handlers would have called it? Elena considered. Most handlers haven't had their lives saved by their dog 3 times over. I have. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, measured. Strickland finally spoke from the far end of the table. We grounded 6 aircraft yesterday. Dozens of VIPs rerouted. A federal contractor is under arrest. Public trust is shaken. He looked at her not as a superior, but something closer to equal. And it was the right call. Outside the room, Blitz sat patiently, watching the shadows of boots and movement under the door. He wasn't tense, just waiting, as always, for her. Elena stepped out a moment later, not victorious, but lighter. She knelt beside him. No medal for you today either, she whispered, hand brushing the soft fur behind his ears. But they're listening now. Blitz blinked once. That was enough. The room was quieter now, not because the questions had stopped, but because Elena Morales had stopped deflecting. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about trust. General Ainsley tilted her head. We're not here to discredit your work, officer, but multiple command officers have expressed concern that you delayed clearance on instinct alone. So I'll ask plainly, what convinced you Blitz was right? Elena's jaw moved once before words came, and when they did, they didn't come clipped or tactical. They came personal. He doesn't hesitate without reason, she said. Ever. She straightened a little in the chair. The air in the room felt warmer, closer. There was a mission outside Fallujah, she began, voice not breaking but bending just slightly. A recon sweep along an irrigation trench. Standard route. Nothing flagged on drone feed. Quiet, hot, too quiet. The senior officers listened, eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but focus. "I had a rookie with me," she continued. 12 weeks out of Fort Leonard Wood. Could barely keep his pack tight, kept apologizing every time he stepped on gravel. Blitz was out front, sweeping. She looked down at her hands for half a beat, then back up. And then he stopped. Not a bark, not a growl, just stopped. Ears forward, head low, not moving. I thought maybe he caught scent of jackals. But when I called him back, he didn't flinch. Eyes locked on a patch of sand not 5 feet ahead. The memory was still etched behind her eyes. Still there. I followed his stare, and that's when I saw it. A sliver of metal, barely a nail's width, buried under dried mud and dust. She paused. It was a tripwire, homemade, wired to an artillery shell. Would have taken out all 3 of us. No one in the room spoke. Elena went on, quieter now, but sharper. He didn't growl, didn't paw, just froze. Like instinct held his whole body still because he knew. A beat passed. When Blitz stops like that, the world stops with him. I've learned that the hard way, and the lucky way. General Ainsley's eyes hadn't moved from her. Colonel Strickland nodded, almost imperceptibly. "You believe," the brigadier said slowly, "that your dog has some kind of sixth sense?" Elena's lips curved, but not into a smile. "No, sir. I believe he has one sense, but it's the right one. And it's never dulled by ego, fatigue, or confirmation bias." She took a breath. "We train them to obey. But the best ones, the rare ones, they don't just obey orders. They override them when it matters." The room sat in that truth a long moment. No one reached for a rebuttal, because this wasn't protocol anymore. It was proof, living, breathing, 4-legged proof. Later in the hallway, Blitz leaned his weight into Elena's leg as they walked, not because he was tired, but because he knew in the way only he could that she'd just put everything on the line for him. Again. And she'd do it again tomorrow, without hesitation. The memo came down quietly, no press, no podium, no camera flash, just a single-page document signed by 3 departments and stamped in red, effective immediately. No aircraft cleared for VIP or high-security transport shall proceed to flight status without final pass inspection from a certified K-9 unit trained in mechanical stress detection. A second line followed, short, bolded, underlined, pilot program. To begin with, K-9 unit number K-91, Blitz. Elena reread the sentence again, then again, not because she didn't believe it, but because she finally could. The room was quiet now, lit only by the late glow of a desk lamp and the rhythmic click-click of the ceiling fan. Blitz lay curled at her feet, head resting on one paw, the other twitching in sleep like he was still working, still watching. Even unconscious, some part of him never fully rested. She reached down and gently brushed the fur along his back, fingers tracing that familiar scar just behind his shoulder, a souvenir from Kandahar. A reminder of where this all began. "You changed the rules, buddy," she whispered. Blitz gave a soft grunt in response, half dream, half acknowledgement. A knock came at the doorframe. Captain Vance stood there, coffee in hand, eyes more tired than usual. "You saw the memo?" he asked. Elena nodded, still seated on the floor beside Blitz. "I did." Vance stepped in. "It's a big shift. Not everyone's thrilled." She smirked. That's usually how good changes start. He sat on the edge of her desk, exhaling like the last 72 hours had just caught up to him all at once. "You know what finally pushed it through?" he said. "It wasn't the confession, wasn't the fracture report. It was Judge Ward. She said, and I quote, 'The only reason I'm breathing today is because that animal was trusted more than a checklist.'" Elena blinked, slowly. She hadn't known that part. Vance let the silence stretch, then stood. "He's not just part of the system now," he said. "He is the system." And with that, he left her alone again, with the dog who changed the rules. She looked down at Blitz. He let out a long breath, muzzle twitching against the floor tile. For a moment, Elena just sat there, leaning back against the cabinet, knees pulled to her chest, head tilted to the ceiling. She wasn't sure if she felt pride or exhaustion, maybe both. All she knew was this wasn't the end of the story, but it was the start of something better. It wasn't a parade, no marching band, no stage lights, no speeches scripted for applause, just a private hangar at the edge of the airfield doors half open to the morning light, wind lifting dust from the concrete, and a small crowd gathered in a semicircle around a handler and her dog. Blitz stood at heel still, his coat catching the sun like burnished bronze. He wore no vest today, no harness, no rank, but every soul in that hangar knew who he was. Chief Halverson cleared his throat, holding a small velvet box in one hand. In the other, a challenge coin the same kind carried by elite operatives, pilots, and mission commanders. He looked down at it, then back up. "In my 28 years," the chief began, "I've handed out this coin 6 times, every one of them to a human who stepped up when the system blinked." He paused. "Today will be the 7th. A hush rippled through the group. He stepped forward. What Blitz did wasn't instinct. It wasn't guesswork. It was something else entirely, something this department is still learning how to quantify. But whatever name we find for it, it saved lives. And it changed the way we do our jobs. He knelt, not to Elena, but to Blitz. With a practiced motion, he placed the coin on the floor just between the dog's front paws. Blitz didn't flinch, didn't move. But his eyes flicked to Elena just once. The cameras clicked, a few reporters lingering at the perimeter per the chief's request. No lights, no questions, just silent documentation. One photo would later go viral. The German shepherd, head slightly tilted, eyes locked on the coin. Elena crouched beside him, hand resting just behind his neck. No smiles, no dramatics. Just a moment that felt like it belonged in a frame before anyone even took the shot. Afterward, people approached. Quiet words, nods of respect. One pilot whispered, "You saved my daughter." Blitz took it all in with his usual stillness. He wasn't trained for moments like this. But he didn't need to be. When the hangar emptied and the crowd thinned, Elena finally sat down beside him, back resting against a crate of flight manuals, coin in her palm. She turned it over slowly. One side, the division's emblem. The other, the motto engraved beneath a set of wings. Truth, trust, no hesitation. Her fingers curled around it. Blitz exhaled beside her, head resting against her thigh now. He was tired. But in that tiredness was a weight lifted, a job done, a message received. Not every medal goes to those who speak. Some go to those who simply listen, better than any of us ever could. The hangar had returned to routine. At least, that's what people wanted to believe. 2 mornings after the ceremony, Blitz walked beside Elena down a row of grounded rotorcraft, no fanfare this time, just oil fumes, checklist tablets, and the steady hum of maintenance crews clicking through diagnostics. It was supposed to be a simple follow-up. Reconfirm airframes post-storm, make sure nothing else had slipped through. But Blitz slowed. His gait changed, not abrupt, but intentional. Ears up, muscles alert. He pivoted his head, nostrils flaring as they passed one of the maintenance bays. Elena caught it immediately. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, stepping back with him. Inside, a mechanic in dark coveralls stood by the tail rotor of a Sea Ranger 12, pretending not to notice them. Blitz didn't bark, didn't growl. He just froze, staring. The mechanic shifted, glancing up, too casual, too late. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Elena stepped closer, badge visible. "Name?" He hesitated. "Bryce O'Malley, subcontracted through Aviacorps." She checked the log on her tablet. His name was there, authorized, cleared, nothing abnormal. But Blitz didn't move. His eyes never left the man's hands. Something Elena didn't know what was wrong. "Step away from the aircraft," she said quietly. "Now." O'Malley's smile flickered, but he obeyed, too smooth, too quick to surrender. She called it in. "Need someone from Security Command to Bay 6, quietly." Blitz sat as still as a statue. An hour later, O'Malley was in custody, and Elena stood outside the security office, jaw tight, reading through the compiled findings. Payment logs, unexplained deposits over the last 8 weeks, small, frequent, just enough to go unnoticed. Security footage showed O'Malley meeting Ryan Denton behind the maintenance shed 11 days prior. A quick handoff, a flash drive, a handshake that lingered just too long. "He was paid to install access patches," the tech analyst muttered beside her, "back doors into the diagnostic system. If that rod failed mid-flight, he could make it look like pilot error." A silence settled between them. Elena stared through the glass at Blitz, now lying near the entrance, head resting on his paws, still watching, still waiting. It wasn't over. The fracture had been real, the sabotage real. But Denton hadn't acted alone. "He's not just reacting," Keller said later that day, reviewing the security footage. "Your dog, he knows when something's off. It's like he reads people." "No," Elena replied, her voice quiet. "He reads moments." She knelt by Blitz, brushing a hand down his spine. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. "Same smell, same twitch, something you remembered." Blitz didn't respond, but his tail gave the faintest thump, just once. The investigation officially widened the next day. Denton's arrest had been just the edge of the thread. Now they were pulling the whole thing loose. And Blitz, he wasn't just part of the story anymore. He was the one writing the next chapter. The cemetery lay just outside the base perimeter, hidden beneath a canopy of white oaks that rustled gently in the morning breeze. The grass had been cut recently. Everything was still, respectful, undisturbed. Elena parked at the far end, far from the other visitors. She didn't bring flowers, only Blitz. He followed silently as she walked the narrow path between polished stones. No leash. He didn't need one. She stopped at the third row in. The marker was simple. Worn but clean. SSG, Marco Alvarez K9 Unit, Iraq. Honor isn't what you carry. It's what you leave behind. Her fingers brushed the edge of the granite. She knelt slowly, almost like muscle memory, like this spot still held weight her body remembered. "Hey, Marco," she murmured. "It's been a while." Blitz sat just behind her. Not too close, not too far. His ears flicked at the sound of her voice, but he stayed still. "I brought someone," she said softly, eyes fixed on the name. "You would have loved this dog." She laughed once, quietly. It caught in her throat. "He's stubborn, smarter than most people I know. Has this way of knowing when something's wrong, even when no one else sees it. Reminds me of you, actually." The wind shifted. A leaf tumbled across the grass, brushing against the side of the stone. Elena's gaze dropped to her hands, calloused, steady, the same hands that used to throw the practice sleeve while Marco and his German shepherd, Echo, ran drills in the heat of a Fort Hood summer. "I never told you, but after you died, I swore I wouldn't work with canines. Couldn't even look at one for years. Thought if I stayed away, it wouldn't hurt like that again." She exhaled, and the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was held. But then Blitz showed up, not assigned, just found his way to me. And I knew. Same eyes, same kind of quiet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a faded patch frayed around the edges. Marco and Echo, still stitched into the fabric. "I kept this," she whispered, setting it gently at the base of the stone. "Didn't know why. Now I do." Behind her, Blitz shifted slightly. His tail didn't wag, but he rested his head across his front paws, eyes never leaving her. He knew. Not the details, not the years, but he felt the change in her, the kind of ache that didn't need words. Elena sat in the grass for a while, saying nothing, just breathing, just remembering. Then finally she stood, dusted off her palms, and turned toward her partner. "You ready to go, boy?" Blitz rose smoothly to his feet. As they walked back toward the car, Elena glanced once over her shoulder at the grave. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible, "for teaching me how to trust again." The hangar doors groaned open as dawn spilled gold across the tarmac. The helicopter sat waiting, rebuilt, re-inspected and cleared after 72 hours of non-stop work. On paper, it was ready. But Elena didn't trust paper. Her eyes were on Blitz, sitting outside the hangar still, alert, calm. "You ready?" she asked. Blitz didn't answer. He didn't need to. Chief Technician Mara Vance approached, wiping grease from her hands. "She's solid. I'd fly my own kid in her." "I believe you," Elena said, but she didn't move. "You still want him to sweep?" "I trust your hands. I trust his instincts more." Blitz approached without command. He circled the chopper, sniffing, scanning, pausing. His movements were precise, almost surgical, beneath the belly, along the struts, into the cockpit. His ears flicked once. He tapped a paw, then sat erect, still, calm. The hangar breathed again. Mara whispered, "That's a yes?" Elena nodded. "That's a go." From the mezzanine, Lieutenant Howell watched in silence as Blitz returned to Elena's side. She rested her hand on his head, quiet trust. No ceremony, just bond. The fuel truck hissed. A tech gave a thumbs up. "Fuel secure. She's ready to lift." Blitz rose. Elena felt it before she saw it. His stillness. His stare. He moved again straight for the fuel cap. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He froze. "Elena?" Mara asked, tense. Blitz stood nose to seal, unmoving. Elena crouched beside him. The cap looked secure. No leaks. "Check it again." The tech twisted. The cap gave too easily. A hollow click. It wasn't locked, the tech muttered. Would have vented mid-air, Mara said, paling. Vapor ignition, cascading failure, disaster, narrowly averted. Blitz stepped back. Mission complete. How did he know? The tech asked, stunned. He doesn't guess, Elena said. He notices. No judgment, no reprimand, just truth. Howell arrived behind them. That's twice in 72 hours, Mara added. Twice he saved our lives. It wasn't just respect anymore. It was awe. Blitz wasn't just a dog. He was the difference between operational and oblivion. Elena touched his collar. You're the only one who doesn't blink. Blitz licked her hand once, then sat. The blades turned. The chopper lifted this time, with Blitz on board. Elena sat behind the flight crew, headset resting on her neck. Blitz lay near her boots. He had swept again before boarding. Every seam, cable, and rivet. When he sat in the cockpit calm and sure it had felt like permission. Now he slept, not ears up standby, but full-bodied rest. One paw stretched toward her, chest rising in slow, safe rhythm. Elena smiled. She remembered the first time, the tremble in his hind legs, the mistrust in his eyes, the label, too reactive, too stubborn, unfit for duty. They were going to retire him, until she said, "Let me try." He hadn't obeyed. He had chosen to stay. Now, he slept at 8,000 feet. The pilot's voice crackled. "Cruising altitude, she's steady." "Copy that," Elena replied. "We thank him," the pilot added. The co-pilot chimed in. "He can inspect my car if he wants." Laughter. But Blitz didn't stir. He was elsewhere now. Elena let herself lean back. The weight of 3 sleepless days unraveled from her spine. Outside, sunlight danced over the snowcaps. She looked down again. Blitz twitched, dreaming. She touched his fur. "You did good," she whispered. And the cabin hummed not with tension, but with peace. The mission was complete, and for the first time in a long time, so was he. Elena slid the file across the polished wood table without a word. The FBI liaison, a wiry woman in a charcoal suit named Agent Devika Rao, glanced at the manila folder, then at Elena. One brow raised. "This from Denton?" Elena gave a single nod. "Pulled from the raw interview, post-confession. He kept talking even after the cameras went off." Rao opened the folder and scanned the first page, a schematic, then emails, then incident reports, safety failures, near misses, unfiled damage assessments, all tied to a name that had been hiding in plain sight, Skybridge Aerosystems. 3 faulty blade replacements, Elena said, tapping the documents as Rao flipped through. 2 undocumented hangar rewirings. And this? She paused, pulling another printout from her coat. A payment routed through a shell company that leads back to Denton's consulting fee. Rao let out a long breath, the kind that said she wasn't surprised but still disappointed. "You're suggesting this wasn't a one-off, that the mechanical incident was part of a pattern." "I'm not suggesting," Elena replied quietly. "I'm stating." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with calculation. In the corner of the room, Blitz sat still, his ears forward but body relaxed. His presence was now customary in briefings like these. Not for show, not for drama, just silent assurance, like a heartbeat in a room full of crossed wires. Rao leaned back in her chair. "Skybridge is on 3 federal contracts. We audit them quarterly." "Check the subcontractors," Elena said. "Check the maintenance firms they acquired in the last 18 months. It's not about their planes, it's about access. And control," Rao added. "And misdirection," Elena finished. There was something cold about watching sabotage unfold, not in chaos, but in form-filled spreadsheets, names signed in ink, invoices labeled routine inspection, and behind it all, human hands turning trust into leverage. Denton's guilt had cracked something open. And the damage, Elena realized, went far deeper than a helicopter blade. "I'll push this to Bureau Ops," Rao said, closing the file. "We'll need corroboration. Maybe a sting." Elena stood. "I've already tagged 3 technicians who did time at Skybridge before showing up in our supply chain. One of them, Blitz, flagged." Rao glanced down at the dog. "You're kidding." "He stopped during a sweep. Same kind of pause he gave before we found the crack. No alert, just stillness, enough to pull records." Rao's voice lowered, reverent now. "That's not instinct. That's surgical." Elena looked at Blitz, her expression unreadable. "That's him." Outside, the day was turning, light falling through the windows like a new truth being born. This wasn't over. The air might be clear again for now, but what hid inside the wires, the bolts, the sealed reports? They'd just begun to dig. The envelope didn't look like much. Plain, no stamp, no return address. Just her name. Handwritten, clean strokes. Left on the windshield of her Jeep while she'd been inside grabbing a coffee. 2 minutes, maybe less. But the second Elena opened the door, Blitz froze. He didn't bark, didn't lunge. He growled, low, subterranean. The kind of sound that doesn't ask, it warns. Elena stopped mid-step. The engine hadn't cooled yet. Nothing looked touched. But Blitz's ears were locked forward, eyes sharp. He wasn't looking at the car. He was staring straight at the envelope. She approached carefully, every nerve aware now. Blitz stepped in front of her without command, sniffed once, then circled the hood. His tail lowered, muscles coiled. Something about it wasn't right. Elena slid on gloves, pulled the envelope from under the wiper. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. "Some things stay buried for a reason. You'd be wise to let them. No medals for martyrs. S." She read it twice, then again. There was no smudge, no fingerprint, no trace of anger, just calculated intent. Her breath fogged slightly in the cold air. This wasn't bluster. This wasn't Denton. This was something else. Something older. Sharper. Not just a warning. A test. Would she flinch? Blitz brushed her leg gently. The growl was gone now. He was watching her, not the paper, not asking, waiting. She looked down at him. "Yeah," she murmured. "I smell it too." It wasn't the words. It was the rot behind them. Someone was still invested in silence. Someone was watching the cracks, hoping they'd seal back up on their own. But she wasn't built for that. Neither was he. She folded the letter, slipped it into her inside pocket, drove straight to command and handed it off for forensics. Let them trace the toner. Let them analyze the paper stock. She already knew what mattered. This wasn't over. It was just beginning to get personal. The silence inside the Internal Affairs conference room wasn't the kind that came from peace. It was the kind that builds after impact. 3 agents sat across from Elena. No uniforms, just dark suits, pens poised over notepads that hadn't moved in minutes. The air conditioning hummed too loud. Blitz lay by the door, still alert, eyes half-lidded but aware of everything. The senior agent Marlowe leaned forward. "We've found evidence that one of the senior mechanics approved the inspection without even looking at the torque calibrations." He paused. "The same one who trained Denton's entire intake crew." Elena didn't blink. "So, it wasn't just Denton?" Marlowe gave a single nod. "There's reason to believe the network goes higher, possibly external funding." She exhaled slowly. "Industrial sabotage on active military hardware. That's not just corporate greed. That's treason." "No one's used the word yet, but we're circling it." They laid out photos, timesheets, financial reports, redacted names, dark lines across truth. The silence settled again, like ash. Marlowe leaned back. "We're offering you federal protection, Sergeant Morales. For your safety." A pause. "And the dogs." Elena shook her head before he finished. "I'm not the one in danger." He frowned. "You received a direct threat. That's danger by every definition we use." She looked down at Blitz. He wasn't watching them. He was watching the hallway beyond the closed door. "Eliminating me wouldn't stop this," she said quietly. "It would delay it. But him?" Her hand rested lightly on Blitz's flank. "He's the one who saw through it, every time." Her voice didn't rise, but the gravity in it deepened. "Blitz doesn't hesitate unless there's a reason. He senses shifts we can't measure. Things buried beneath paint and welds and lies. And when he reacts, he's never wrong." She looked up again, her gaze steady. "So no, I won't disappear, and he definitely won't." Marlowe studied her, not arguing, just listening. Then, "We'll double your escort anyway, whether you call it protection or protocol." Elena nodded once. "Fair enough." She stood, gathering the files they'd approved for her. Blitz rose in a fluid motion beside her. Calm, anchored. As they moved toward the door, Marlowe spoke again. "You believe this ends with the next name?" Elena didn't turn back. "No," she said. "But I think it ends with someone finally listening to the quiet things first." Outside, rain began to fall. Blitz paused at the step's nose to the wind, a shift in pressure, an instinct. Elena followed his gaze toward nothing in particular. But something always came with the storm. And Blitz always knew before it broke. The hangar looked different in daylight. No alarms, no grounded aircraft, no tension humming in rivets, just silence, broad light, and the sound of boots echoing down the long steel corridor. Elena walked past rows of freshly repainted birds' blades, stilled but ready. She wasn't in uniform today, no badge, no sidearm, just a clipboard and a name that these days carried weight. At her side, Blitz trotted without a leash. He didn't need one anymore, not here. A young cadet stepped back instinctively as they passed, then flushed when Blitz simply looked up, uninterested. Elena gave the cadet a faint smile. "Relax. If he doesn't bark, you're fine." They reached the training wing, a small room with coffee too strong and chairs too short. 5 men and women from Aviation Safety Command were already seated, files open, waiting for her. Colonel Reeves gestured to the front. "Sergeant Morales, well, now Consultant Morales, I suppose, we're ready for your input on Phase 1. She raised an eyebrow. "So it's happening?" "It's happening," Reeves confirmed. "Full K-9 integration protocol for mechanical clearance on all airborne assets. We're calling it Blitz Sweep. Hope that's all right with you." Elena looked down. Blitz was sitting by her boot, ears alert, tail flicking once. The old man was already part of a system that would outlive them all. She stepped forward and clicked the first slide of the presentation. The current inspection matrix assumes that all threats are visible to human eyes or instrument readouts. But we now know that certain anomalies, fuel blends, residue from tampering adhesives, decay in wire insulation emit chemical traces that machines miss. But he didn't. The next slide. Blitz's image on the tarmac, paw raised over the helicopter's undercarriage. That's not luck. That's training and instinct intersecting. She continued, laying out the proposed course modules. Controlled exposure to aircraft scent environments, desensitization to rotor noise, focused alert protocols for sabotage indicators. It was technical. It was measurable. It was real. It was Blitz translated into curriculum. An hour passed. When she finished, no one spoke right away. Finally, Reeves said, "We'd like Blitz to be the model for certification." She blinked. "He's nearly retired. All the more reason. He's proven. We'll record the training modules with him as the baseline. Future teams can calibrate off his reactions." Elena looked down again. Blitz had laid his head on her foot, breathing slow, a nap creeping in. She nodded. "Then you'll need to know how he thinks. It's not just about what he smells, it's when he chooses to trust it." Later that afternoon, she took him out to the tarmac one last time. No cameras, no press, just a clean runway and a wind that smelled of jet fuel and memory. "Blitz," she said softly. He stood. She pointed to the same model of aircraft from that first mission, the one where it all changed. He padded toward it, paused at the skids, then moved under the tail, nose working. His body stilled, then relaxed. All clear. Elena exhaled. This time she believed it before the engineers would ever check. Somewhere behind her, Reeves's voice came through the radio. "Legacy in motion." She looked up at the sky, then down at the dog who had rewritten everything. "No," she murmured. "Legacy on 4 legs." The helicopter touched down with the unsure rhythm of inexperience. It wasn't the pilot's fault. He was seasoned. But the real test stood a few yards away on 4 nervous legs, tugging slightly at the leash, eyes darting beneath the spinning blades. The pup was young, barely certified. A golden-tan German shepherd with paws too big for his frame and ears that hadn't quite decided where to point. His name was Scout. Next to him, the rookie handler adjusted her stance, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come on, boy. Just like we practiced." But Scout wasn't moving. His nose lifted into the wind, then recoiled at the jet fuel and heat. He backed up. No bark. Just refusal. Fear. On the sidelines, Blitz observed. No leash. No command. Just watching. Elena knelt beside him. "Don't interfere," she whispered, more to herself than him. "It's not your turn anymore." But Blitz was already rising, not with urgency, not with dominance, with presence. He walked past Scout slowly, not looking at him, not posturing, just existing. Each step was deliberate, calm. He moved beneath the chopper's tail, circled the skid, dipped his nose into the intake vent, then turned, sat, and looked to Elena. All clear. Then he stood again, and with a glance that barely lasted a heartbeat, he looked at Scout. The younger dog took a tentative step forward, then another. The rookie handler swallowed hard, heart pounding. She didn't move, didn't speak. Scout reached the skids, then dropped his nose, began to work. Minutes passed. Scout completed the full sweep. His movement was hesitant at first, but steady. He made it back to the handler, tail giving a quick wag, and looked up for approval. Blitz was already lying in the shade nearby, eyes half closed. a quiet master class. The rookie jogged over to Elena, Scout at her heel. I didn't think he'd go through with it. He freezes every time he hears rotor noise." Elena looked down at Blitz, then at the handler. "He just needed to see it done right." "You think he'll be ready?" "He already is. He just didn't know it yet." The moment passed without applause. No one clapped. No brass bands. But in the control tower, one of the trainers pressed the button to mark pass on Scout's file. In a small window on the screen beside Scout's name, another line had already been written: Mentor, Blitz, K901AG. That night, Elena sat with Blitz outside the hangar. The sun was setting, the last one they'd see here together. She scratched gently behind his ear. "You didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't need to." He blinked up at her, then rested his chin on her boot. She looked toward the flight line, where the young shepherd now trotted beside his handler like he'd been born for it. "You showed him what legacy looks like," she whispered, without saying a word. Blitz didn't move. He didn't need to. The runway at Redwood was almost empty now. No drills, no shouting. Just the soft crunch of gravel beneath boots, and the faint creak of metal cooling under the last amber stretch of sunlight. Elena walked slowly, her steps matching the rhythm of the dog beside her. Blitz moved in sync, not in a heel, not in command, just with her. No leash, didn't need one. They stopped at the edge of the airstrip where the concrete gave way to wind-blown grass and sky. It was the same place they'd stood weeks ago, when everything felt like it might fall apart. Now, it was still, and somehow, whole. Elena crouched beside him, ran her hand across the back of his neck, fingers brushing the smooth ridge where scars from the harness used to sit. "You knew before anyone else," she murmured. "Before the engineers, before the reports, before me." Blitz didn't move, just blinked slowly, watching the horizon. Elena's voice caught slightly in her throat. "If it ever happens again." She paused, searching the sky like it might give her the right words. "Bark before I doubt." She smiled then, without looking down. "That's all I ask?" There was no grand response, no heroic pose. Blitz didn't rise to attention or press his snout into her hands. He just leaned, gently, a quiet shift of weight against her leg. Solid, steady, like a promise made of gravity, like he'd always be there, even if he wasn't. Somewhere behind them the sun dipped below the ridge. The runway lights flickered once, then stayed lit. Elena stood, brushing off her fatigues. She didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. Instead, she walked, and Blitz followed. No urgency, no doubt. Just two silhouettes fading into the golden edge of evening, framed by a sky wide enough to hold every mission they never spoke of again. In the quiet steps of a German shepherd and the unwavering gaze of a handler who dared to trust more than protocol, we are reminded of something deeply human. Loyalty isn't taught, it's felt. Blitz wasn't just a K9. He was instinct wrapped in fur, discipline fused with devotion, and a silent witness to what it means to protect without question. Through Elena and Blitz's journey, we don't just see a story of sabotage and justice, we see the heartbeat of trust, of choosing connection over checklists, of listening not just with ears, but with intuition. In a world often clouded by data and doubt, sometimes it takes a dog to remind us where truth really lives. German Shepherds have long been symbols of courage, intelligence, and service. But beyond the uniform, they carry something even more powerful: the ability to love without condition and protect without pause. Let this story remind us to honor those bonds, to listen deeper, to value every creature that stands by us, not for what they do, but for who they are. Because sometimes the quietest bark carries the loudest truth, and love never needs translation.